Okay, so I'm Taji Moore. I'm one of the Aboriginal staff members in the Arts Funding and Development team at Create New South Wales, and today I'll be joined by Damien, Webb and Melissa Jackson from the State Library of New South Wales to talk to you about the Aboriginal Creative Fellowship. So in starting today's webinar, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land that we now call New South Wales, and acknowledge the elders who have gone before us and those who are present with us today. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We'd also like to acknowledge you, our country peoples, and the lands from where you were joining us today. So really, we're really pleased and excited to have you here today, and that you're interested in applying for the Aboriginal Creative Fellowship that we're offering with the State Library of New South Wales. It's a really exciting new opportunity. So yeah, thanks so much for your interest in applying. I'll just jump to the next slide. Thanks, Kartika. And we've got Tammy Close and Kartika Suharto Martin behind the scenes with us today, doing slides and support. So before we begin, I'd just like to go through some housekeeping. So I'm just noting that today's webinar is being recorded and may be published online. And for people who've just joined us, we ask that you please mute your mics until question time after the presentation. And for the best viewing experience, we suggest clicking on the View Everyone tab, which is just at the top centre of your screen, and then select View Active Cameras so you can just see the people who are speaking. And if you'd like to ask a question again, feel free to pop it in the chat box in the right-hand corner. So we'll just jump to the next slide. Cool, so Warami and welcome. So today's webinar, we're delivering to sort of assist you as Aboriginal artists, knowledge holders and cultural practitioners with the application process for the Aboriginal Creative Fellowship, and to gain a bit more of an insight into the library's collection, how to access their resources and tips for preparing your application to this round. So today in the webinar we'll be covering the following areas. So some of our current funding rounds that are open. We'll provide a bit of an overview of the Aboriginal Creative Fellowship and the assessment criteria and how to address those. How to make a sort of compelling application that will stand out to the assessors who are reading your application. We'll also get a glimpse into the State Library of New South Wales' Indigenous collection and resources and get a bit of a show and tell, so that should be really exciting. And then we'll have a Q&A session afterwards to answer any questions that you may have brought with you today or that may have arisen from the presentation. And we'll just jump to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just quickly, these are some of our funding rounds that are currently open. Create New South Wales' Arts and Cultural Funding Round. All of these funding rounds close on the 1st of March at 5 p.m, including the fellowship round. One round that sort of is open all year round is our Small Project Grants Quick Response funding program. And if you'd like any more details on these rounds, you can visit our website. The guidelines are there as well, and we have some resources for applying to those funding rounds also. So yeah, our website is create.nsw.gov.au. And we'll just jump to the next slide. Cool. So the New South Wales Aboriginal Creative Fellowship is a new opportunity offered by Create New South Wales in partnership with the State Library of New South Wales. The objective of this fellowship is to support an Aboriginal artist, knowledge holder or cultural practitioner to undertake creative research that engages with the Indigenous collections and resources at the State Library of New South Wales and to work towards a new body of work. The cash value of the fellowship is $30,000. The grant is to be used for the development of new work, research and travel, among other activities that can be defined by you as an applicant. You can work across any art form for this fellowship. There's no limitation on the creative outcomes that you propose to deliver. You know, we do suggest speaking to Damien and Melissa in regard to your creative proposal in the process of applying. So to apply to this funding round, you must meet the eligibility requirements that we've included up here on the slide. So you must be an Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander individual, and we've just got a definition for the purposes of these guidelines. An Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander individual is a person of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent who identifies as an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person and is accepted as such by the community in which they live or have lived. You must have also have a strong cultural affiliation with a country that is now called New South Wales, be a resident of New South Wales, an Australian citizen, and be over the age of 18. So just making sure that you meet that eligibility before applying. That's very important. We'll just jump to the next slide and just go through the assessment criteria. So all of the applications to this round are assessed against the following 3 criteria, which are merit, impact, and viability. So I'll just spend a little bit of time breaking these down for you in the next slides. So if we just jump to our next slide, thanks, Kartika. So criteria 1 is merit. So this is, so when you're applying, this is sort of the first opportunity that you have to tell the assessors who will be sort of reading and assessing your application what your rationale for your fellowship is, your proposal idea, and to sort of outline your professional achievements and what you've sort of delivered so far in your career creative practice. So the areas your responses will need to address are the rationale for your fellowship proposal, what is your vision, what is your artistic and or cultural idea for your project, what are your creative research processes that engage with the library's collection, how do you plan to engage with the library's collection, is there a specific section of their Indigenous collection that you're particularly interested in engaging with, what do you really want to zone in on. Your rationale should also include a short summary of the key activities and a timeline for your project. You'll also need to outline the quality and reputation of your previous work and some of your professional achievements that you've made that are sort of relevant to this opportunity. In the merit section of the application, you'll also need to provide supporting material to evidence your claims. So supporting material will include confirmation letters and or letters of support related to your project. So if you're working with particular communities or elders, if you could have support letters from them in your application, that would really strengthen it. Having up-to-date CVs, including your own CV, very important. Also CVs for artists or other collaborators that you're involving in your project. If you could include those, sort of maximum 1 page per person. Also providing examples of previous creative work or projects that you've delivered. So these can be provided as high-res images or links to URLs if there's the videos or a web page. And these should also be clearly labelled in the application as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the next criteria is impact, and this is your opportunity to tell the assessors about the anticipated presentation outcomes and the benefit of your proposed project. So your impact responses should address the following areas: how you plan to present or promote the outcome of this fellowship to audiences and or communities, and the anticipated outcomes and benefits of this fellowship program for your practice / career, and how your work will contribute to a broader understanding of the State Library's collection. Next slide, please. Okay, and then the final criteria you'll need to address in the application is viability, and this is where you outline, this is where you show the planning for your project. So what you'll need to outline in your application is how you plan to abide by Indigenous cultural and intellectual property, or ICIP protocols, and how you will engage with the State Library's collection. For example, will you engage digitally or physically in person by visiting the library? Keep in mind as well that you'll also need to be available for this research project over a period of 12 months. So now that we've gone through the assessment criteria, I'll now hand over the webinar to Damien and Melissa from the State Library of New South Wales to give us a bit of a show and tell of their collection and talk a bit more in depth about the fellowship program with them. So I'll just jump to the next slide and hand it over to Damien and Melissa.
Thanks. Hi everyone, my name is Damien Webb. I'm a Palawa Malakadi man from Southeast Tasmania, and this is Melissa Jackson.
Yes, it is. And I'm Sydney born and bred, Gadigal land, but I'm of Bundjalung descent.
Yep, so we work here at the State Library, which I think many people will have heard of or gone past, the big old sandstone one on Macquarie Street. So the library here is a non-lending library with 6 million, is it? 6 million items in the historical collections, which are quite heavily focused on colonial era collections. But a lot of that material does reflect Aboriginal languages, families, social and political history, as well as literature and collections by Aboriginal writers, creatives, artists, spanning kind of the last 230 odd years.
Yes.
So I've only been here 2 years, so I'm still technically new. The library is open and free to access for all, which includes a lot of material which has been digitized, which is the process by which the library scans in old photos, books, oral histories, and makes that material available through our online catalogue. So you can jump on the State Library website and do some preliminary searches there if you know specifically what area you're looking for, if there's a specific town, specific publications, photographs. So a lot of that can be done online, particularly that beginning work when you're still kind of maybe getting an idea of what's held at the library. I think it's probably really important to mention a lot of people may assume that we only have books and paper, and we have a lot of books and paper. We are a legal deposit library, so basically everything that has been published in New South Wales, there is a copy here, so books that are no longer in print, unique books that have small print runs, those kinds of things. So we do have a very strong print collection, but we also have some pretty weird and unbelievable things as well. So beyond the photographs, we have a lot of ephemera. So those are things like ticket stubs, posters, flyers for events, community meetings, spanning a lot of different community organisations. We've got protest posters and badges. We have objects created by people. We also have material called realia, which is a weird library word we use. It's kind of just objects. So Melissa will show you a couple of those, but we're talking things like breastplates, king plates, cups, furniture, banisters,
Death masks,
coins. Who's on that coin? Sorry, testing.
I'm thinking of something else. That is Rickety Dick, yeah, Warra Warra, who was the he was from the eastern suburbs. He was definitely a Gadigal man, and he saw that that the Europeans had all of these tollways, and so that you had to pay to go on the road. And so he's gone, all right, you want to go on my land? You've got to give me some money. And so the colonials did. They gave him money, and that's how he earned his living. So he was so revered that when he died, a coin was struck in his honour, and it was legal tender.
One of very few. So yeah, we, as you can probably tell, we love talking about this stuff. One of the strongest and I suppose most special parts of the library here is that we do have a dedicated Indigenous branch. So myself and Melissa and a few of our colleagues specifically work with communities and collections. So a lot of work going into digital return, understanding the collections, decolonising collections, and bringing in contemporary Aboriginal collections as well. the library has been very supportive and has a fairly genuine desire at the moment to really re-examine what all this stuff means, and particularly from a First Nations lens and context. So quite recently we did the Khmer exhibition, which people can still come and have a look at until the end of the month. If you want to kind of see the ways that the library is trying to retell even stories like the arrival of Cook and the Endeavour, the library is taking a very, very different approach than we used to. Next slide, please. So we have worked with a number of different Aboriginal artists, animation artists. We worked on a number of projects over the years, some before I was here. So you can see some images here that Lucy Simpson and Jake Tajinski worked on us with recently. One of those is from a site called Gather, which is a new online kind of digital keeping place that we're starting to put in some of our key Aboriginal collections to allow people to tell us more and to provide an access point that doesn't necessarily require you to be using the catalogue and experiencing some of the slightly more problematic language and contexts that's still in that old school catalogue. So we are very, very keen to really completely change the way that we think about our collections and the ways that we as Aboriginal and First Nations people are presented in those collections is often quite awful. And what is really necessary is for us to reimagine that, to change that, to take ownership of this kind of material and use it to tell the stories that we want to tell, or to make those stories better reflect the actual history of New South Wales and Sydney, which isn't often done. So we definitely see that expression as a way to decolonise or to celebrate or correct historical collections. We have things like the Ginniby papers and some of Uniapan's papers. So there are celebrated First Nations collections here that don't fall under that kind of colonial category. And it is just as appropriate for this fellowship to work with material like that as it is to perhaps look at something more challenging and more colonial and more controversial, I suppose. I should mention that we're not even a little bit worried about controversy. We like strong, bold ideas, so don't be nervous if you think that your pitch might be a little tricky. Melissa and I are always happy to have a chat and talk you through some of the collections and the way that your idea might work.
We are known as the historical barbarians, so we are into rewriting, correcting history,
Correct.
basically.
That was Mark Latham's term. Next slide, please. So in terms of the fellowship, the successful applicant will have access to us. We will provide support with ongoing research, mentoring in some of the ways to access and reuse collections, looking at things like ISIP and copyright as they may impact the collections that you nominate to work with. There will be access to the Fellows Room, so you will have access to a dedicated study and working space away from the public, so you can actually kind of get set up and do some of that work with those primary collections in person. COVID, all going well in that one. That being said, we can also work online through Teams and video conferencing. I definitely recommend that you spend some time at the library, as some of these collections haven't been scanned in, and some of the physical objects, you'll actually want to get a feel for them. Some of them have a very interesting texture and smell, and depending on what kind of artistic practice you have, those reflections might be very, very useful. You'll also have access to this wonderful woman, career librarian. Melissa's been here for many years, and there's
very kind.
Shame, in a good way.
Very kind.
And there's very little she doesn't know about the collections or can't find out. Ronald Briggs as well, who works now with our acquisition and curation area, will be available to provide some support and oversight or history of some of the collections you might look at. It will also include access to archival material, papers, and so we have a lot to do with Aboriginal activists, writers and creators over the years, as I mentioned, and having access to and the time and space to sit and work through those is definitely part of the fellowship support we provide, which would include access to computers and printers and things as well at that very kind of administrative level. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned before, just to give you a really rough idea, we have published materials, so those are manuscript books, that you would be very used to. The pictures collection, which includes old glass slides as well as collages created in the 70s and 80s, any kind of image you can imagine we have in the collection somewhere. So that even if your project was looking at the different physical types of images of Aboriginal people, or whether you're wanting to look specifically at the images themselves, there's a lot of scope there. Realia, so that's the weird objects. Melissa will show you a couple of those. They're very strange and quite wonderful, but also sometimes quite challenging. And I get the sense that a lot of people aren't aware of some of that stuff. We don't tend to have human remains at the library in the collection. That's more of a museum sin. We have other sins as a library, but not that particular one. Unpublished manuscripts, so that's including the journals, things like journals and diaries, minutes from Aboriginal corporations and businesses, political, sport, health, kind of the whole lot. We do have some of the old photographs and material from stations and missions and things too.
That's right, yeah.
And family history information, if you were looking to do a family history angle as part of the research. Ephemera, as well as some government records, not all. Some of that will be is actually kept with the state archives.
That's right.
Rather than with the library.
And there's a real nerdy reason why we've got the records, but
as well as they'll explain in great detail if you ever want to ask.
Oh yeah, I'm just up for it. But yeah, there's a nerdy reason why we have some records, but the government records, but not all.
Yeah. I should also mention we do have a pretty comprehensive map collection, which does include maps that...
I forgot, yeah.
I forgot maps as well, I always do. So some quite incredible maps. So if you're looking at different conceptions of country and images and the way that land has changed or been mapped or been destroyed, we have maps from almost every decade and era, which can be quite useful in that research and that conception. I'm going to throw to Melissa to just show some... quickly run through some of the different kinds of things we have in our collection to give you an idea. We can do this all day, but we might set up another event next week or the week after to do a longer chat through some of the collections if you like.
Yes, I could talk all day, and I know we don't have very much time, so we're a library. We have published materials, we have original materials. Damien was talking about our unpublished material. Now, I'm going to show a couple of items from some authors, some Aboriginal authors. Way back in the 1860s, there was a fabulous woman by the name of Bessie Flower, and she lived in Albany, Western Australia. And for some reason, she ended up in Victoria, and they saw great things in her, and so she was sent to Sydney to be a teacher, to study to be a teacher. She then went back to went to Victoria and was teaching, and they said, "You're going to marry that man over there." And she said, "No, I don't love him. I don't want to marry him." Because back in that day, if you got married and you were a woman, you weren't allowed to be a teacher, or you weren't allowed to work. And she loved teaching. So what she ended up becoming was a letter writer. And so she wrote so many letters to the government in relation to the conditions on the reserves, on the missions, and what happened with the children, all of those types of things. And most of her letters are down in Victoria, but we have one letter, and you probably, it's in the mylar casing. Yeah, is that a good angle of it? So there, oh, you can still, yeah, you can still can't see it very well. But yeah, you have to, that's right, you have to come in and have a look at these letters. So this is one of the letters that a female in the 18th wrote, looking at the conditions of Aboriginal people. There you go. And not only do we have a letter of her, but here she is. This is Bessie. And this is her as Bessie Cameron, and the man that she had to marry, who was very good looking, by the way.
He was, she did well.
She did well. And there she is, and she wrote all of these letters. These mylar coverings are to look after the items, and there's a whole bunch of writing on the back as well. So not only are there pictures of Bessie and her husband, but these are her little cherubs, these are her little children. So I think that letter was sent to one of her friends to say, "This is Bessie, this is how I'm going at the moment." And so that she was an author, one author from the 1860s. And what we have here is, it looks like just a normal innocuous folder, but within this folder is the first draft of Ruby Langford Ginnaby's Don't Take Your Love to Town. And so what you see in here, and I think, can you see, does it focus in? No, it doesn't. So again, it's a teaser. You've got to come in and actually get this thing. It's what she called her book in the first instance was a Dubé story. And Dubé means woman, meaning a woman's story in Bundjalung lingo. And this is her handwriting on here, but also with it, so this used to be her son's folder. And so of course we've got, it's all in Mylar, but this is her handwriting, and you can see the editors, this is the preface to Don't Take Your Love to Town. And then it's got all of her, it's also got, if you can see, if I don't break this thing, all of her little notes, post-it notes to, and this is what I'm going to have to do next, and that type of thing. So obviously Ruby was one of the first people to have, first women, or men, to have written their own life story in the first instance. And it was just a normal story. I grew up in the country. I came to this big smoke, and I was a seamstress, and then I lived in a car, and so it's just a normal story, but it's just amazing from its Aboriginal perspective, from the first person.
And crossed out colonial. It's very interesting to see the ways that things have been edited, and I suppose the strength of the unpublished material is that you can see the different versions of things that have eventually been published or released.
The true intent of the author before the editors come along, and and so this Damien was talking about maps, and so this is a book by an Aboriginal artist, female artist by the name of Penny Evans. And she created, she's a ceramicist, and she works in mixed medium as well. She wanted to write a genealogy, and she wanted to write a genealogy without words. And so she created the paper. She did absolutely everything. And this is it. And so she pulled out, so this is just what, and she's from, she's Gmilroy, but she saw the light and she became Bundjalung. She moved to Bundjalung country. And so this is her story. I'm just random pages here with my ring. That's so we're boring here at State Library New South Wales. And it's just amazing. This is an amazing book as well. So these are the types of things you can possibly, when you're interacting with the collection, you can create things like this. So one other thing, if I haven't run out of time.
How are we doing for time?
How are we doing for time? When Damien was talking about Realia, this hideous thing turned up. Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. But this is was on the bottom of a staircase as like a banister, the top of the staircase on the banister. And I thought to myself, this looks familiar. It looks really, really familiar. And so me and one of the other staff members that we had a while back, his name was Clem, and we went through photographic books, and so there's a famous photographic book called the Kerry and King Photos of Aboriginal People from the 1880s to about the 1890s, and this was created in the 1890s. So, and on the bottom it's got the artist's name. He carved his name in there. And so we went to this big book just titled Australian Aborigines. That's it. That's all it is. And then in it, there are a whole bunch of photos of Aboriginal ceremony. But if you, just please help me with this one because it's a little bit screamy. There you go. There she is. Just no, not that side. That side. There she is. It's mirrored. And so the artist actually used this
to create
to create this image.
That's the kind of research that we're talking about as well, finding ways to connect different representations, and sometimes with the help of these geniuses and some of the other Aboriginal staff that have worked here over the years and the communities we connect with, we find these connections between things that tell stories in a way that are much more interesting and give us a sense of agency rather than us just being props in colonial stories, which tends to happen all the time. We have one more beautiful thing to show you. This is my...
I love this. I love this. So this is Women with Parasol, and it's by an Aboriginal artist called Johnny Kangatang, and he was one of the first Aboriginal artists to use pen and paper. And those women look so uncomfortable.
He's painting all the white women of the colony.
All the white women of the colony struggling around with the whalebone corsets, and one of them's got a rosy red cheeks because it's she's in the heat. So he was from around Gippsland area, but he was encouraged by the artist Eugene von Gerard, and so Eugene von Gerard said to him, "Okay, Johnny, can I draw a picture of you?" And he's gone, "Only if I can draw a picture of you." So this is Eugene von Gerard by Johnny Kangatang. And we not only do we have Johnny Kangatang, Eugene von Gerard, but in here, this one here, that is Johnny's, Eugene von Gerard's version of Johnny. And I just ran out of time to go and grab that one.
No, we can't show you everything. So we thought we'd just give you a bit of a taste. And hopefully it helps to give you an idea that working with the library collections isn't always just, researching paper and creating more paper. There's all these different forms that the collection takes that can inspire you in sometimes pretty interesting ways. So I think we'll throw back over now to, we'll throw back over to Create New South Wales.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Damien and Melissa. That was so interesting. Could listen to you talk all day. We've now moved to the Q&A part of our webinar, where we throw the floor open to our audience today. If you have any questions, feel free to turn on your cameras and microphones, and be happy to answer them. So I'll just see if we have any questions in the chat box. Okay. So Tammy's asked if she can work with any collection, so I might let Damien and Melissa answer.
Yeah, pretty much. There are some collections in the library that are restricted, so there are a couple of things that are like really quite hardcore cultural collections, which may require some permissions from the appropriate language groups, and there might be some material that's still in copyright. But that being said, if you're using it to create a new creative work, generally copyright is not going to be a big problem. So basically, we obviously would really prefer people to be working with some of the Indigenous and First Nations collections. But that being said, if you're a First Nations artist and you're working with any collection, what you're creating is going to be part of the First Nations collections anyway. So there's no real restrictions, but there is a lot of material in the library. So I'd recommend chatting with Melissa or myself just to maybe try and help work out the scope of what you want to look at, because if you're saying things like all photos of Bundjalung people, the research involved with finding all of those, because not every photo is identified, can be tricky. So we might be able to tell you that there's a specific photo set or a specific photographer that you could work with. But yes, you can work with pretty much anything in the collection.
We've got another question from Lorena asking about using, as part of your research and creative practice application, can you apply to use the photographic collections? Can you also access the whole collection or things you haven't even thought of or knew about before?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what you can work with here, absolutely. In terms of the application, it might be helpful to tighten up the scope of what you want to look at, just because, as I said, there's like 6 million items. So even if you were here every day for a year, you're going to struggle to get through all of that. But Melissa and I are able to help provide some of that advice and maybe suggest things that you wouldn't know are here. There's a lot of things in the collection that people aren't aware of. So if you've got like keywords and ideas and topics or places or publications or community organizations that you want to follow up, we can always help. If you send us an email, we can help point you in the right direction.
We have a new staff member coming on maybe soon, could be if they sign the paper. And she's amazing with photographs and tracking photographs down as well. So the different formats, the daguerreotypes, the ambrotypes, she knows which ones they are. So and where they may be housed, it's always going to be with us, of course.
Yeah, and I suppose no, that's all good. Hopefully that's the question.
We've got another question from Ree, asking if I want to work with any of the Indigenous collections, are there restrictions to what I can access?
Generally speaking, no. There are a small number of collections in the library that have been clearly identified by knowledge holders as being only accessible to initiated men of a certain area, or collections that clearly indicate that it's secret or sacred. But that is a very, very small percentage. We are working towards ICIP protocols here. So any collections that you use that have cultural knowledge, we would expect that you would be working or consulting with the representative community or families, which we can help try and put you in touch with that. Obviously, if it's material that reflects your own cultural language, then you would probably have some level of authority there. It depends collection to collection, but broadly speaking, there are very few collections that are fully restricted. The library doesn't really take material that is that culturally sensitive because we don't really see it as being appropriate to be here at the library. We are instead working with other communities around New South Wales to make sure they can look after things on country. So broadly speaking, pretty much anything that we will point you to, you will be able to access, and you can access copies of as well. So if your practice involves wanting to destroy those images or cut up those records, we can make copies available for you to do that. Definitely not the original. But
not the original.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, cool. I've got another question. Do successful fellows need to provide a written report, or can the report be a creative artwork or series of artworks based on responding to the collections? Okay, so that must be about the sort of presentation outcome, I think. So rather than like a creative, like a presentation, if it could be a written report.
So I mean, if we're talking about the output of the fellowship, is that?
Sorry, Crystal, did you mean like a written report as in like when you're quitting at the end of the project, or can the report be a creative artwork series or artworks based on responding to the collection? Sorry, Crystal, I'm just trying to work out what you mean by the written report.
Hi, Taji, Tammy here. It's a question from the Eventbrite. It could be both. It could be an outcome from the State Library as a presentation, or it could be an acquittal thing. I think Brianna's mentioned something in there.
Yep. And from the library's perspective, really the most important thing for us is engaging with a First Nations artist, giving them some money and getting their input into reimagining or creating something that responds to our collections. So whether that is a written manuscript, if it's a creative writer, or is someone, you know, a playwright, whether they want to do something that is very text heavy. Otherwise, if the outcome is a performance of a dance piece or a series of visual artworks, we're very, very open to any of that. And the library would, depending on the format of the work, would also look at whether or not we can add that to the collection afterwards. Or if there are notes or journals that you create during the process, whether you want that to be part of the collection as well, for future First Nations artists and researchers to be able to see the ways that you engage with the collection. But very, very flexible, really, from our perspective. There's no need for it to be a written report if that's not something you're comfortable with or the way that you work. And we all write all the time, so if you ever want assistance writing things or anything, we can definitely help.
Yeah, awesome. So Brianna was just saying as well, yeah, from the Create New South Wales perspective, you only need to do an acquittal, which is like your report at the end of the project. Yeah, but then for the fellowships, the outcome can be creative, and yeah, we can work with the State Library to realise that presentation component. We've got another question from. They're all coming in. We've got one from Lorena. Are researchers with a creative practice eligible to apply? I'd say yes. Yeah.
I mean, as long as the outcome is a creative outcome, the research component, I suppose we use the word research, but we don't always think of research as like, you know, ARC grants and university research. For a lot of us, research is literally just going through some of these records and creating a story based on what you're finding and what you're reading. So don't be too put off by the term research in this context. And Melissa and I will be available to assist with that if you need to find things or understand what you're seeing. That's a big part of our role here.
So Julie, hi Julie Goff. Julie's asking, given State Library of New South Wales holds the most significant archives in the world relating to Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the G.A. Robinson papers, is there any way to introduce a broader than New South Wales or Tasmanian Aboriginal specific arts fellowship as well?
I suppose the reason that this is the first time I've done a First Nations Creative Fellowship, and a big part of the reason that the scope is only to New South Wales for this one has to do with the travel restrictions and the uncertainty around whether or not we can bring anyone over here. Things seem to be clearing up a bit, but when this was all being developed, it was just not something that we could do. In regards to the G.A. Robinson papers, that's something that we're going to be working on quite specifically this year outside of the fellowship process. So that's something that we'll be looking to, now that travel's opening up, we're very aware of the ongoing project to try and get that material, or at the very least, very high quality copies of that material back down to Tassie.
Yeah, cool. I was wondering as well, so Julie, are you thinking of applying, or that was like related to the library's collection in particular? No, it's okay. Okay, I think we've, okay, we don't have any more Eventbrite questions. Okay, we've got another question from Lorena. She's saying, is there an easy direct way to access the digital Indigenous collection catalogue?
Yeah, the State Library's website has a very, very straightforward search function to see there. So if you jump onto the State Library website, you'll see the search bars up the top. It'll automatically set to search the entire catalogue. So you can start looking for either the format or the keyword, the place, the person. We don't separate, I suppose, Indigenous collections and non-Indigenous, but you'll find Indigenous collections through the keywords, which would be family names, place names. IATSIS language codes have started to be put in there if you're looking at language material. So you can have a bit of a look and a bit of a dive through. Otherwise, you are more than welcome to email Melissa or myself, and we can send you some direct links to the kinds of collections you're after, or to the website as well.
So of the material that I showed you, the very small amount of material I showed you, the letters are definitely digitised, the mapping genealogy is definitely digitised, the photographs are digitised, and the Johnny Kangatang is digitised. So only the figurine is not digitised. So the vast majority of our material has been digitised. There's just a little line that says view digital copy.
Yeah. So some material, if you are looking in our catalogue, you won't be able to see it. It'll just tell you that we have it and give you a description. For that material, you would need to come into the library to have a look, and we can put that aside for you if you're wanting to check it out. There may also be, depending on what kind of material it is, we may also be able to take a photo for you and send it if travelling in while you're putting together the application isn't something you can do. So just let us know whatever you need.
Yeah, great. And Tammy and Brianna have just included the links to those in our chat box. Ree's just asked a question about the internal state-based collection protocol. So what are the internal state-based collection protocols regarding repatriation of materials that are related to other states?
Yeah, I mean, there's no specific protocol or mandate that I'm aware of. It's something that's negotiated on a case-to-case depending on ownership and where things are. We're very aware in this library here that this library started out collecting for all of Australia. So we have fairly significant material that does apply to states outside of New South Wales. And we are trying to figure out the best way to work with that material, which, as Julie mentions, might be sending back the originals. In other cases, it's sending fair copies. It is something that is still being established in terms of protocols within libraries. I think museums have got a little bit of a clearer process for that, but people have only really started being critical of libraries in that sense, the way that they need to be, quite recently. So it is definitely something we're keenly aware of. And I think as there are sensitivities as well. So if you are planning to use material from our collection that relates to another state entirely and you're not from that area, there would be some considerations there around protocols and how you're expressing and presenting that material. And as Lorena's question there, in terms of unidentified families, it's a really good point. There's a lot of old images of Aboriginal people in our collection that don't have names attached and might not even have a language group or a place attached to them. So there will be some risk management in terms of which images you use and whether or not we have all the information about that image or not.
Yeah, it definitely raises some interesting questions about cultural material and repatriation and conversations about that with protocols. Cool, thanks so much, Damien and Melissa, for answering those questions. We've now run out of time for questions. I'll just jump to the next slide where we've got some tips for, our sort of top 9 tips for applying. We have, so I'm just going to jump to my notes. So our top 9 tips, our first tip is to consult with Damien and Melissa from the State Library of New South Wales about your creative fellowship proposal idea. They'd love to hear from you and share what resources they do have, and we'll provide their details for you shortly. Check out our How to Make an Application help guide on our website. as this will help you navigate through the application questions. Also consider your planning stages. This will help you sort of figure out the activities that will need to be included in your creative fellowship proposal. Another tip is to make sure that you articulate your responses as clearly and concisely as you can. Most of the questions in the application have a 300 word limit, so don't feel pressured to fill this word count. Sometimes less is more. We also suggest start sourcing your support letters from relevant community or community members or elders, or any organisations that will support your fellowship with the State Library. Another tip is to work offline to avoid any online technical issues with your application writing process, and then you can transfer, copy and paste your responses into the online form. And also just noting that there is a 300 word limit per question. Next suggestion is to ask a peer or a trusted friend to read your application, to just make sure that your proposal flows and that it sort of reads logically. And just remembering that you want your narrative to read strong and clear in the application. A suggestion also is to try not to submit your application right on 5 p.m. on the closing day. Maybe sort of consider submitting it a day or two before 3 to 4 p.m. Just to avoid any sort of technical hiccups or any network issues that you might have on the day that might prevent you from getting it in on the deadline. And our last tip would be to give us a call if you get stuck on any questions in the application, as we're here to help. We'll just jump to the next slide. Cool. So online resources. So you're welcome to use any of our online resources to assist you in submitting your best application. These can be found under the funding and support tab on our website. So we've got a list of resources here that we've created to assist with the application process. And we'll just jump to the next slide. Yeah, so if you have any further questions following today's webinar, or questions that you may have sort of missed the opportunity to ask in our Q&A session, please do contact us in the details listed on the slide. So you can contact Damien or Melissa on the details here, or you can contact myself for any sort of application related questions. I'll just jump to the next slide. Cool. So to stay up to date with funding announcements and other opportunities that are available through Create New South Wales, you can follow us on our social media platforms, or sign up to our e-news, which you can do by visiting our website, which is listed on the slide. And you can follow us on any social media platforms to keep up to date with what's happening. So yeah, I'd like to thank everyone so much for joining today's webinar session. We hope that you found it useful, and we look forward to receiving your applications. So thanks so much, and stay safe and stay well.